actually Tubular Gamers. I think we're back with another video. Maybe we're back with another video? How did I get here? Who am I? Where am I?
Well, with 2025 quickly wrapping up, it's time to look over all of the games I played this year and determine which ones truly disappointed me. Those games that I went into with decent expectations for one reason or another, and ended up walking away from these games just feeling rather hollow, shallow, and relatively disappointed. I usually go into games with pretty low expectations. I like to be surprised, I like to be wrong, and of course have those expectations exceeded, but in the case of these games, I was still let down for one reason or another. Now, it's worth keeping in mind that just because I say a game is disappointing doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad game. Plenty of games on this list are bad, but there's also a number of good games on here as well. And these were games where I just simply expected more from them, or I wanted them to be better than they ended up being. And as always, I'll try to explain my reasoning for each and every one of these games. So this list is going to be in no particular order. However, at the end, after I've gone through all of these games, I'm going to be selecting one to receive the Tubular Award for Most Disappointing Game of 2025, or as some fans have called it, the Tubi. I'm going to be singling one game out that truly stood head and shoulders above the rest to truly disappoint me more than any of these other games. So now you got a reason to stick to the end. As always, any support is truly greatly appreciated. I really am just a one-man army here. I got a lot of end-of-year videos planned for everybody. Any support is immensely appreciated. So please subscribe, it really does help out the channel and it's free. You can also let me know down below your most disappointing game of the year. Let's get a discussion going, hype the video, whatever the fuck that means. I also got a drama-free gaming Discord link in the description. This intro's gone on long enough, I know you want to hear about them disappointing games, so let's get to it. So we're going to be starting with Pokemon Legends Zaza. Now, I'll just immediately start this off by saying that I think Pokemon Legends ZA is still an alright game. I don't think it's this dumpster fire of a game that a lot of social media has portrayed it. There absolutely is a good game in here, but after the amazing Pokemon Legends Arceus, I really was expecting a lot more from this. Maybe I just went into this with way too high of expectations, but I was absolutely blown away with how good Legends Arceus was. Like, that is maybe the best Pokemon game I have ever played, along with New Pokemon Snap. Both of those rival the classics in terms of their qualities. So the follow-up to Legends Arceus, yeah, I was expecting good to great things, and what we got was what honestly felt like a rather big step back from the previous game. And I thought that the adventure was just nowhere near as engaging or compelling as Legends Arceus. That game just absolutely blew me away like an atomic bomb. This, by comparison, felt like a wet fart. Which, you know, still got some enjoyment out of me. I think wet farts are funny still because I'm 13 years old, but that enjoyment was fast, fleeting, and gone with the wind. Now, Legend Zaza does succeed in a few areas. I think the story is actually pretty decent here. I think the city is interesting, and I don't think anybody will deny that the music is pretty fantastic in this game through and through. Like, there's a lot of great music in this game. But outside of that, I feel like I have issues with almost every single aspect of this game. Obviously, there's the game's graphical prowess and general presentation. I don't really have anything good to say about this, outside of it having a very smooth 60 FPS, which was very nice, and the game actually did feel rather polished in terms of bugs and glitches, but unfortunately, graphically, this game looks fucking terrible. We could be here all day shitting all over the graphics, but plenty of people have already done that for me. I will say though, on top of that, I really wish there was some voice acting here. I think the cutscenes and story in general would have been even more compelling if there was even a basic amount of voice acting. But that's a rant for another day. While I like the city and find it to be an interesting setting, and I actually think the level design is pretty decent, it's just the city. Sure, they let you go on the rooftops and try to mix things up with these wild areas, but it really is just this small city. That's the entire game. And I'm sorry, I need a bit more variety in my open world Pokemon game, and I don't think that's unreasonable either. The two last open world Pokemon games had tons of different environments, and not only were they bigger to boot, but they also felt a lot more alive and lived in. There were Pokemon like everywhere. In comparison, Zaza's city sometimes feels like a desolate wasteland, and by even the halfway point, I was starting to get pretty sick of this concrete jungle. Like, we really couldn't have any areas outside of the city whatsoever. Really, I find that hard to believe. and that lack of variety only extends to the entire game. While I actually do enjoy aspects of the combat, and I think it's pretty cool that Pokemon is trying something different after all these years, the combat does start to get pretty stale and repetitive. Much faster than the turn-based combat of prior Pokemon games. I actually really liked what they had in Legends Arceus, and I was hoping they would continue that. But this, it just kind of felt like inferior Xenoblade Chronicles combat, if we're being real. I also wish there were more areas to catch Pokemon, and I wish that the pacing and general structure just had a bit more variety to it. It really is just kind of be the best, and there's this other subplot going on, and I just kind of wish that there was more to it than that. And that's really how I feel about the game in general. Like, what we have here is a fine enough RPG that absolutely does have its moments of greatness, but for the most part it just kind of meanders around in mediocrity. And this was probably the game that I have the most to say about, but it could have been so much more. So this next one is a title that I feel like a bunch of people have already forgotten about, and that is Lost in Random: The Eternal Die. Now, the first Lost in Random was totally a sleeper hit. It was visually very interesting, and the gameplay was actually pretty different from what you might expect. Unfortunately, The Eternal Die decides to do something very differently, and while that isn't inherently a bad thing, sometimes doing something different is good, this is not one of those cases in my opinion. The game is a roguelike hack and slash very akin to Hades. In fact, its similarities are almost striking. Many would say that this is a Hades-like, it is so similar. While the visuals are still cool and pretty different from most games out on the market, it's nowhere near as impressive as the first game, and I think that the presentation in general is just a downgrade from what the first Lost in Random had. Additionally, I don't find the story to be anywhere near as compelling as the first game, and you might go at this point, okay, stop comparing it to the first game, how does it stand on its own? Well, even individually, I don't think it stands up all that well either. I think this is just a very middling to average hack and slash that doesn't have the depth, complexity, or nuance needed to stand toe-to-toe with Hades or any of the other great Hades-like. The combat and movement are functional, but nothing great by any means. The roguelike elements are just not enough. There's not enough random elements between each run to make them feel all that different from each other. And for a game called Lost in Random, that seems like a cardinal sin. All of the runs feel similar to each other, and the pacing, along with the general progression, just feels barely existent, and once you beat the game, that's it. There's really no reason to ever go back and do another run. I certainly don't ever feel compelled to play this game again, but maybe I'm in a minority camp here. If you look online, this game's reception seems to be pretty good, and I just don't see it with this one. I'll take the first Lost in Random over this any day of the week. So this next one, I honestly should have just known better with the House of the Dead 2 remake. Now, I absolutely adore the original House of the Dead 2. It's one of my favorite light gun shooters. Shit, it's really just one of my favorite arcade games ever. I've got a lot of good memories of going to the movie theaters and playing it in those arcades. So when I saw that it was getting a remake, naturally I was excited. But then I saw it was being made by the people who made the first House of the Dead remake, and got a bit more skeptical. That first House of the Dead remake was unfortunately not very good, but I was willing to give them a second chance. They probably learned a lot from that first remake, and everyone deserves a second chance, but unfortunately, this game just sucks. Like, this remake really bites, and it's genuinely one of the worst remakes I've ever seen of a video game. Now, at the end of the day, it still is a competent, functional rail shooter that you can totally have some fun with, but if you compare it to the original game, I feel like this game just falls apart in every aspect. Let's just run down the list. The game's visuals, I hate them. I don't like how this game looks. I feel like it completely fails to capture the aesthetic, vibe, tone, or atmosphere of the original. It looks cheap, and at times it looks like a bunch of pre-made assets were just slapped together. The voice acting, honestly, the less said about it, the better. The original game had notorious, infamously bad voice acting that was so bad it became good. This, yeah, it's just bad. But hey, all of this could be overlooked if the actual gameplay was still intact, and unfortunately, it's just nowhere near as good as the original. It doesn't feel as nice, it doesn't flow as nice, and it's just nowhere near as fun. The game's visual clarity, something very important for a rail shooter, just isn't there either. It's sometimes hard to see, and it's sometimes hard to tell when you've actually killed a zombie. The original game featured rather over-exaggerated reactions to being killed, so it was really obvious when the zombie died, so then you could focus on the next one. Here, it's just not that obvious, and it actually fucks with the entire game and its difficulty because you're not entirely sure if you just killed a zombie or not, and that split-second timing is sometimes all it takes for you to get killed, and that can lead to a rather frustrating experience. I just didn't have all that much fun with this, and the whole time I just kept going, man, the original is so much better, and the new content they added and the new modes don't really add anything either. The game is a boss rush mode. Wow, the game is like 40 minutes. A majority of the gameplay is the bosses anyway. No, this game gets a big ol' thumbs down from me, and if you're looking for the best home version of House of the Dead 2, it still is the Wii version by a landslide. So this next one definitely gives me a frowny face, and that is JDM, Japanese Drift Master. So here in 2025, we got some pretty incredible racing games, and unfortunately JDM is not one of them. Pre-release, this game had a fair amount of hype, a lot of people really liked the demo, and even though it was an indie game, it actually got some licensed cars, and graphically is pretty impressive. But unfortunately, after playing all the way through it, this game just doesn't really come together in the way that I think anybody wanted it to. While I can't sit here and tell you that this game sucks, I also can't sit here and tell you that it's very good either. It's just kind of like Death by a Thousand Cuts Kane and Lynch 2 style. And what we're left with is a middle of the road game, pun absolutely intended.
Shut up, bitch!
Visually, I think the game is great, especially for being an indie game. Like, this is a real looker, and I think the soundtrack is really good as well. But the actual moment-to-moment gameplay, yeah, I got some beef with this. The physics are just incredibly inconsistent, and oftentimes, it just doesn't really feel like this game knows what it wants to be. At times, it'll be super arcadey, like Need for Speed levels of arcade racer, but then from time to time it decides to go a little into the simulation mode, and so we're stuck with this weird in-between simcade that doesn't really please either crowd, and it just doesn't feel all that nice. In my time with the game, and I did actually beat this one, I just never really felt like I got a great handle on the controls, feel, or ironically the handle of the vehicles. Sometimes it felt like I knew what the hell I was doing, and then sometimes I would just spin out for seemingly no good reason. And the drifting, you know, like the focus of the game, it's literally in the title of the game. This is just all over the place. Sometimes it feels nice and sometimes it feels like ass. And at times I felt like the game was prioritizing the wrong things about the drift. I would just start snaking in the middle of the road, drifting back and forth on a straightaway, and I'd be getting tons and tons of points. But then doing a decent sized drift on a turn didn't get me all that many points, and so it just led to this really unfun playstyle where I was just legit just drifting back and forth as much as I possibly could to get some big combo going, and I just didn't think it was all that enjoyable. The game doesn't have a great sense of speed to it for the most part, in my opinion, at least not till the end of the game. And the story, oh, the story's real bad. This is like the most weeb car fantasy gooner story bullshit that you could think of. And while it's kind of presented to you like a manga, I just did not like this whatsoever. The open world just feels completely wasted. It's super lacking, and honestly I would have just preferred a menu with all of the events and locations you could go to. The open world is empty, lifeless, and feels more like an afterthought than anything else. The game in general just feels rather lifeless at times. There's nobody walking around, and there's barely any other cars around. Why does Driver on the PS1 have a more lived-in open world than this game? And you definitely don't want to be hitting one of these cars, because this game has some of the worst collision I've ever seen in a racing game. Like, the game just does not know how to react, and oftentimes the game just starts glitching out. I know that they're still updating this game, so it absolutely could get better, but in its current incarnation, this one would be a really hard sell, and I couldn't help but walk away from this one feeling rather disappointed. I feel like it should have been so much more than this. And then we have Lost Soul Aside, and this one stings. I feel like this game actually had a lot of promise. It was in development for a very long time, and having PlayStation back it certainly gave me some hope for this one, but unfortunately this one just really failed to deliver in a number of key aspects. I can't sit here and tell you that this game does everything wrong and it's a pile of fucking shit, but I couldn't tell you that it's a very good game either. So what areas does it succeed in? When it comes to the movement, general feel, and your character's moveset, especially when it comes to the combat, I think this game actually totally succeeds. There's a fair amount of depth to the combat, and there's a nice level of customization. This game very much is a hack and slash, not a Souls-like or anything of the sort, and it's good to see action games of this type coming back. So where does this game fall short? Well, sadly, pretty much everywhere else. The story in this game is just downright atrocious. It is horrible. Everything from the characters to the writing to the dialogue to their motivations, it's just bad through and through. This was one of the few games I've played in recent memory where the more I play it, the less of a crap I give about the story. And it arguably just kept getting worse and worse, and my indifference level kept rising and rising until it was past 9,000.
You just posted cringe. You're going to lose. Subscribe.
Yeah, I know that one was a bit cringe, but seriously, I just could not care what was happening on screen. A brick on the ground would have genuinely been more interesting than this game's story. It just does not come together in any meaningful way. And it takes itself so seriously that it's honestly just kind of annoying. The game's graphics and general presentation are incredibly inconsistent and all over the place. At times, the game actually looks pretty good. Some of these environments look great, and then at other times it just looks incredibly outdated. It kind of actually reminded me of Stellar Blade in that aspect, but you know what Stellar Blade did a lot better than this? Pacing and general structure. This game is just horrid when it comes to structure. It is fully combat through and through. Like 95% of the game is combat. No exploration, no time to take in the world. There's very few, if any, slower moments. There is some platforming here. Unfortunately, it's not very good, and the game is just sorely lacking in variety. Some more better platforming and maybe a few puzzles here or there, or basic amount of exploration would have made this a lot less repetitive. Maybe it wouldn't get as stale as it does, because this game gets so stale. The combat gets old real quick. All of the enemies, especially the bosses, are the most tankiest, spongiest enemies you could imagine. It just was not fun to fight these bosses. What should be really cool, amazing spectacles just degrade into this button mashing mess where you're constantly spamming attack after attack and it feels like you're doing almost no damage. Until you of course do a big super move, and then you can start doing some real damage for a few seconds, rinse and repeat. That's pretty much every boss. I don't mean to sound so reductive, but that's pretty much what everything devolved into. It didn't matter how big it was, how cool it looked, or what attacks it did. It was the same general flow throughout. And this game has so many bosses to it, and these should be so cool. But everything just got so dull, so stale, and ultimately so repetitive that I just had to put the game down. I was just sick of it, and it kept going and going. I was just so done with this game that I would have a pretty hard time recommending it to anyone, especially at full price. They wanted way too much for this game, and it did not deliver. Now this next one is one that certainly hurts, and that is Mario Kart World. Now I actually quite enjoy Mario Kart World. I think the game is pretty good to great even. There are actually a lot of incredible things about Mario Kart World. Obviously, it looks amazing. The soundtrack is one of the best of 2025. The karts feel amazing. Like, this game handles like an absolute dream. Probably the best of any kart racer ever. All of the movement tech goes wild, and all of the courses are genuinely amazing in this game. Like, this game should be the best Mario Kart game ever by a landslide. However, there's one big thing that gets in the way of that. The open world, and that ultimately is why it's on this list. I want to love this game to pieces. I want to sit here and tell you that this is a 10 out of 10 must play game, but the open world in this game, it just sucks. And I feel like it really drags the game down a peg or two. Like, I don't want to race in the open world. Racing in the open world is fun for the first few hours, and then you realize that it's just not very exciting. Most of the courses, air quotes, that are in the open world are just straight lines. Sure, from time to time something exciting might happen, but 90% of the time, you're really just going forward, and it gets old fast. And you might go, okay, you don't like the intermission tracks where you're just going forward. Just don't pick those then. Oh, I wish it was that shrimple, but Nintendo doesn't do that. They pretty much force you into racing on these bland tracks on the regular. Like, every other race is going to be one of these tracks. Let me put it to you this way. Racing on the actual courses is peak. Racing on the intermissions is mid. Why on earth would I ever want to race on the mid when I can race peak, when I'm having 3 times the fun and enjoyment? It just makes no sense. No sense whatsoever, but that's how Nintendo plays it. There is Knockout Tour, where I actually think the intermission course does play a vital role, and I actually think that this mode is super fun, and it's where the open world is probably best implemented. But outside of that, yeah, this open world just isn't it. It's lifeless, dull, there's really nothing to do in it. The game doesn't even keep track of which P-switches you do, and it's just such a missed opportunity to an absurd degree. Might I remind you, this is an $80 game. Yeah, I wasn't expecting like a Forza Horizon open world, but I was expecting more than this. And even with how great pretty much everything else is in this game, I just can't look past the open world, and it just has me shaking my head like, why do I want to go back to the previous Mario Kart more? Especially when I think this game controls, feels, handles better, and has a better sense of speed because there's no open world. That's why I want to go back to 8 Deluxe. I will also say adding more racers might not have exactly been the answer. What it leads to is just a lot more chaos that may or may not incentivize bagging more. But we could sit here all day talking about Mario Kart World's pros and cons, and I'm not going to do that. At the end of the day, while I think the game is good, it is a little bit of a disappointment for me, and I expected a bit more from the next Mario Kart entry, not going to lie. There certainly is a bit of copium though, that one day they'll update it to let you just race on the courses you actually want to race on, and there'll probably be some DLC with like Donkey Kong, and hopefully some other Nintendo franchises. I hope this one ends up not being a disappointment by the end of it, and truly can become the best Mario Kart of them all, but as things currently stand, yeah, I'm a bit let down. So the next one we have here is Little Nightmares 3. Now, I think this game is decent and it does have a number of good elements to it. I still stand by that review I made where I said the game was alright, but let's be real here, this game could have been a hell of a lot better and it should have been a lot more than what it ended up being. I'm not going to sit here, stand here, shit here telling you that Little Nightmares is this amazing, incredible series everybody should go out and play, but the first two games were pretty good to great. The second game in particular was actually pretty good. Little Nightmares 3 I would put under both of those. It's easily the weakest of the trilogy. And I really only got one word for that: disappointing. These games should be getting better and better with each new installment. Unfortunately, the game was not developed by the people who made the first two games, and it kinda shows. This game plays it incredibly safe. Like, it is unbelievably safe. It plays practically identical to the first two games. The biggest difference is that the game is fully co-op. Somebody can join you and play through the entire experience with you, and there's a number of puzzles that require both characters. But I feel like the game just doesn't do anything all that interesting with it. It keeps everything at a rather surface level. It doesn't even go as deep as the second Little Nightmares did. It plays out so similarly to the other games as well. Hide from the big scary creature, occasional puzzle with the environment here and there, and a chase sequence every now and then. And it feels like they just had very few new ideas or innovations for this series, so they just played it really safe. It felt like I was in autopilot or going through the motions pretty much the entire game. There was even plenty of deja vu moments where I was like, haven't I done this before in another Little Nightmares game? And I played that game years ago. At the very least, when it comes to the presentation and graphics as a whole, especially with being a bit more budget, I do think they did a decent enough job, and the pacing was fine enough. The game is pretty short though, around 4 hours, and for $40, especially nowadays, that's a pretty high price tag for what they're offering. I would say that this game has pretty much no replayability at all. You're never going to want to play it again after you beat it. And even though it's got some great moments to it, it doesn't have anywhere near the highs that the first two games had. Again, it's not a bad or terrible game, it's just okay. And by the third installment of anything, I kind of hope it's better than just okay. So this next one is one that I'm pretty sure everybody has forgotten about, and that is Hyper Light Breaker. Yeah, did you remember that a sequel to Hyper Light Drifter came out this year? Probably not. And you probably forgot because this game just wasn't very enjoyable. It released in early access at the beginning of the year, and I know it's gotten plenty of updates since, but it's still just not a very good game in my opinion. Like, this is one of the worst games I played all year. It's just a really shoddy 3D roguelike, and I just never felt like I got my groove with this one, and I actually dropped it pretty quick. I don't love how the game looks. I much prefer the aesthetic and visuals of the first game. I think they nailed it there. Here it just looks a little generic, and the gameplay, it's just odd. You choose a character, you explore around these worlds, collect things, and get into fights with enemies, and it just wasn't all that fun. It almost felt like an extraction shooter at times. And when it comes to the roguelike elements, I wasn't really enjoying this either. There's not enough things going on where it feels all that different from each run. There's not a lot of randomization here. And after even just a few hours of this game, I just remember going, yeah, I'm kinda done with this. This just isn't very fun. The combat lacks impact, the game doesn't have a lot of progression to it, it felt rather slow when it comes to the pacing. It was like stupid difficult for some reason at times. And I feel like this just really wasn't the direction that this, I guess now, series should have taken. I think they should have stuck to their roots because it was better, a lot more balanced, and certainly prettier. Maybe at some point I'll come back to this one and try it again, but at this time I really just got no desire with this one. It's one of those games that I bounced off pretty much immediately, which is why I don't have a ton to say about it, other than that I walked away rather let down with this one. So here's one that I really wanted to like but just couldn't beyond a certain extent, and that was Wreckreation. Now Wreckreation, this one is just kind of a mixed bag. It has good elements. It has plenty of great elements even. You can probably notice from this gameplay, it has an incredible sense of speed, and when it comes to the handling and feel, they absolutely nailed what they were going for. That fast-paced, super arcadey, Burnout-like racer. In fact, this game very, very clearly wants to be like Burnout Paradise, to an almost disturbing amount. It was developed by a small studio of former Burnout and Need for Speed developers, and you can absolutely tell that that really was what they were going for here. Everything from the camera, the sense of speed, the takedowns, and just the general structure of the game screams Burnout Paradise. You pull up to the stoplights to do events, there's plenty of billboards to destroy, and shortcut gates to smash, and in that sense, you know, they did successfully recreate Burnout Paradise. It is a little bit more than just we have Burnout Paradise at home. No, this is about as close to Burnout Paradise as it gets. Unfortunately, they forgot one thing. Yeah, they forgot just one key thing when it comes to Burnout Paradise. The, what was it? The Paradise part? Yeah, Paradise City. You know, the open world. The amazing, intricately designed city that had all these shortcuts and different paths. Yeah, that's just completely not here. What we have is one of the most dull, lifeless open worlds I have seen in a racing game in a long time. It's as barren as the Midwest. It's mostly just fields, farmland, and the occasional foresty area. There's pretty much no buildings that you don't immediately interact with, such as the gas station, and at times this open world just feels randomly generated, and it's also giant. It's easily 2, 3, maybe even 4 times the size of Burnout Paradise, and it's 10 times as empty. It was like they forgot to make the open world or something. It's almost like they wanted you to make the open world. Oh wait, that is what they wanted you to do. Yeah, the big selling point of Wreckreation is that you got to create your own tracks, your own open world and stories, and everything you would put down basically stays down. So you might be racing through this open world, but a ramp you put down like 2 hours ago for some dumbass reason will show up, and then yeah, the race is a bit more exciting. Well, that is kind of cool that they give you a sandbox, but the thing you gotta remember is that sandboxes are cool after you've actually built stuff. Before that, it's just sand. Empty, meaningless, bland sand, and that's exactly what this open world feels like. I personally am not the most creative when it comes to stuff like this. I didn't want to sit down and create my own shit to make an interesting, exciting open world. You can join other people's games, and yeah, other people have actually gone a bit wild with it, but it doesn't matter how wild they've gone with it. The open world is just so gargantuan, you're bound to have some dead space, and certainly more than I would like in any normal racing game. I really want to enjoy this game. I actually really want to like it. The racing is fun. The racing is actually very well done. Unfortunately, I feel like that's the only area that's really well done. Everything else is just super half-baked, half-implemented, or just straight up bad. I don't really care for the building. I think the music sucks. The presentation is questionable. It's super janky and buggy, and it's just a rather unpolished experience that clearly needed a lot more time in the oven, and it's pretty obvious what happened here. The studio probably ran out of money. Shortly after the game was released and seemingly didn't sell very well, the studio announced that it'd pretty much be closing up shop, which is a real shame. This game absolutely had potential, and I think these developers with a lot more work and probably some more people could actually make this happen. But unfortunately, the game we have here is okay at best, and yeah, it's just a disappointment, straight up. And then the last game for today is unfortunately Killing Floor 3. Now, I absolutely love Killing Floor 1 and 2 to pieces. Killing Floor 1 is actually my most played video game of all time. Yeah, it's safe to say I'm a big Killing Floor fan. And Killing Floor 3 shrimply did not do it for me. I think the game is totally fine, and you absolutely can still have some fun with it, but it is a far cry from Killing Floor 1 and 2 in terms of its variety, quality, and just overall content and what it has to offer. And you might go, okay, well, Killing Floor 2's had like 10 years to add content. Of course it's going to have more. No, I'm talking like base Killing Floor 2 versus KF3. Base Killing Floor 2 had much more to work with than Killing Floor 3. And it feels like Killing Floor 3 is going to be playing catch up for several years just to get to where Killing Floor 2 is at. And it's like, well, at that point, then why don't you just go back to Killing Floor 2? Which is unsurprisingly what a lot of people have actually done. There are way more people playing Killing Floor 2 than 3 on the regular, and it's not hard to see why. I think Killing Floor 3 does a great job when it comes to the combat and the weapon customization in particular. Like, you can actually really customize every weapon, and that's actually super cool. You can make the same gun 2 completely different ways to the point where it's barely even the same weapon. How is that not cool? And the game actually has a decent number of maps, and some of these are pretty gosh dang good too, where there's a bunch of fun choke points and you're not just going to be camping all over the place. No, there are actually some well-designed maps in this game, and you absolutely can have an enjoyable time on them. And if you look at it on its own, away from Killing Floor 1 and 2, yeah, it's a pretty decent little horde shooter with an engaging gameplay loop and solid progression. Unfortunately though, if you even slightly compare this game to KF1 and 2, I think it just absolutely falls apart. And that's where this game really is its most disappointing. It's just such a step back. The weapons arguably felt and handled better in KF2. The gore is just significantly better in KF1 and 2. The combat in general is more satisfying. In the prior games, I much prefer the enemy roster of the 2 prior games. The bosses are way better in the 2 prior games. They actually have, the Patriarch, the main antagonist of Killing Floor, which KF3 somehow doesn't have. That'd be like having a Mario game without Bowser, but okay, what do they have instead? They've got a few other rather lackluster bosses, if we're being real. KF3's tone, atmosphere, and general aesthetic is just completely off from the other 2 games. People said KF2's atmosphere was off from the first one. It barely feels connected to Killing Floor at all. They're not even British anymore. What is going on? The character roster is kinda lame, and a bunch of the characters are really annoying. They at least updated it so you don't have to be a certain character when you choose a class, so that's good at least. They changed how syringes work. Before it was unlimited, it was just on a recharge time. Now you have a limited amount unless you're the medic. I don't like this. The classes don't feel as individualized as they did in 1 and 2. They blend a little bit more than I would like. The hub area is completely unnecessary and low-key an abomination. They absolutely did not need to put this in the game. The game is not very well optimized still, unfortunately. There's no text chat, which is just whack. There's no custom maps or modding capabilities whatsoever currently, which is just ridiculous. That's what Killing Floor originally was. Even KF2 had custom maps at launch, and they seem to be prioritizing microtransactions and particularly the battle pass more than the rest of the game. And so, shrimply put, I did not enjoy KF3 as much as I would have liked. I was rather disappointed with its lack of inclusions from the other games, and even on its own, I still think the game is just okay. I think the game has a long way to go, and I'm curious to see if they will really stick this out for the long haul. But either way, this game should have just been so much more than it was. But now that I've gone over all of the games that have disappointed me from 2025, it's time to give out the Tubular Award, the Tubi. So the question is, who's getting it? A drum roll, please. The winner and most disappointing game of 2025 is Lost Soul Aside. To me, no game was more disappointing than Lost Soul Aside. I was actually pretty excited for this one, especially because it had been in development for over a decade, and what we saw pre-release looked pretty cool. And honestly, if you go back and look at those pre-release trailers, it looked better than what we ended up getting. These trailers looked way more interesting, engaging, and just exciting compared to the final product. I'm not going to say that Lost Soul Aside was the worst game I talked about today. No, that would probably be the House of the Dead 2 remake or Hyper Light Breaker, but this game just had so much promise to it. It should have been the next great hack and slash. It should have been the next great character action game. And I was genuinely really hoping that this one would be up there with Bayonetta, Ninja Gaiden, and maybe even Devil May Cry. But no, this is a really mediocre, shallow, rather dull hack and slash with a miserable, dreadful story that takes itself ultra serious that I just didn't ultra care about. You know, there's a reason why Bayonetta and Devil May Cry usually don't take itself all that seriously, because the action is pretty ridiculous. This actually does have a fair amount of over-the-top action, but then it doesn't have any brevity or lighthearted moments or even jokes. It's just so serious, to the point that the characters just started to become unlikable. The game also started to get just incredibly repetitive. It was the same loop for all of these bosses, all of these enemies. It didn't even matter what you were fighting for the most part. It was still the exact same loop, just wear down their shield and then do mondo damage. But it didn't even feel like you were doing mondo damage because they had so much health and you were just chipping away for the most part. These felt like MMO bosses more than hack and slash bosses. Like, the time it takes to beat some of these bosses is just ridiculous for this kind of game. 10 to 20 minutes? really, you could probably defeat a boss in a Devil May Cry game just using the guns faster than it takes to beat some of the bosses in this game. It doesn't matter how much depth there is to the combat sandbox, it doesn't matter how many options there are. If fighting the enemy sucks and it's extremely grindy and tedious, it just kinda all gets ruined. There were plenty of games that disappointed me in 2025, as you can tell, and this was a toss-up between this, Killing Floor 3, and Pokemon Legends Zaza. Obviously, though, I went with Lost Soul aside. I think that even with their issues, Legends Zaza and Killing Floor 3 are more enjoyable than this game, and I wasn't let down as much by those. And so when I look back over the entire year, or in a few years decide to look back at 2025, there's only one game that's going to stick out as the most disappointing to me. Lost Soul Aside, and that's why I'm giving it the first Tubular award. Congrats to Lost Soul Aside for getting a Tubi. They should add that to the Metacritic page, and that's it for this video. So hope you all have a good one. Stay safe, y'all. What was your most disappointing game of the year? Would love to know. Bye-bye now.